things like freedom of religion is fundamental to our core. And how we could do anything other is really, at that point, we're weakening ourselves. Right? They're beating us by making us, or through our own doing, not theirs.
Mm-hmm.
You see, so I hope that 2048, and it does. When people read this book, okay, from all different backgrounds, it's not a polarizing book. You know, in a lot of ways, it's very libertarian to say, hey, there are some fundamental rights that also the government, that we have from government. Mm-hmm. It used to be standard conservative values, you know, keep the government out of my life. A lot of that resonates with me. Okay, so this book, it covers the spectrum and tries to avoid that polarization.
So let's talk about your writing process in putting this book together. It was published in April of this year and was at least a decade-long process. Meanwhile, you're lecturing at UC Berkeley. So can you tell us about the formation of this text?
I think H.G. Wells put it best that writing a book is like having an illness that you can neither cure nor deny. So my wife will tell you too that there are just, as many authors will tell, those late nights. I find myself writing at the end of the days, in the wee early morning hours and the wee hours of the evening, much as Jack London did, or Henry Miller, or any number of authors, mm-hmm. right? I'm sure who you meet on a regular basis. And then it's having a story. And here I really feel that with Eleanor Roosevelt and the others, there's another famous Canadian, and I've been touring Canada, and I love touring Canada. I love Canadians, okay? And that's because John Humphrey worked with Eleanor Roosevelt. He was a Canadian. He did the actual research on the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And in 1984, this is as we're further through that trend with the European Convention that I told you about, he wrote, and I used this last week in the University of Toronto Law School where I was a keynote speaker. He wrote, and this is a quote, he said, "If the international community ever becomes really serious about human rights, then we will take the European Convention and make it universal." Okay, now that's exactly what we're doing with this project. So that's the story. And that's the story I'm trying to tell, is that there's a forgotten history here that's very American, very Canadian, something to be very proud of. Mm-hmm. And that's why we have this whole process for people to join us in the dialogue, to teach that history.
I did a story for Diablo years ago about Alfred Peet, the founder of the gourmet coffee revolution, who roasted coffee out of a small shop in Berkeley. And what Pete discovered, because at the time in the late 60s, American coffee was not very nice stuff. It was all freeze-dried and mass-produced. And Pete saw that, you know, there was a market for gourmet, fresh roasted beans, and it's really the best way to present coffee. And what he also recognized was the incredible value that the UC Berkeley community had of international thinkers, and people would come into a shop and say, well, I'm from Turkey and the way we roast coffee is this, and then somebody else would come in and say, I'm from Austria and our coffee houses do this. And I always thought that was this fascinating microscopic study of the global community that exists around the UC campus. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about what the programs are like at the Berkeley Law School, and specifically the 2048 programs with young students from international communities and American students coming together. Can you talk a bit about that?
Certainly, another thought-provoking inquiry, because it's a great comparison. The key thing that you just told me about with Pete was that he went to these other people and talked to them from around the world to find out what they were doing that works. That's similar to what Gandhi did for Eleanor Roosevelt on the Universal Declaration with freedom of religion. She asked him, go out and see what works and if there's support. Mm-hmm. And he came back and he wrote her a beautiful letter saying, and it's in the book, that he thought that the deeper that he went, the more disparity that he would find. Instead, he found that the deeper that he went, the more there was in common. You see? And it's that inquiry, whether you're Pete or Gandhi or Kirk, it's that desire for dialogue. And that's what this whole project's about. And that's what the internet gives us. This incredible technology center here in this building, bringing all these people together. The whole thrust of 2048, more than anything else, and part of the reason why we give ourselves so much time to do it, is to have an international dialogue. That's why the best thing that people can do is to go to our website. There's a green button on there, and it's free. They just give their name and their email address, they get a newsletter, and they get to participate in the dialogue with us. Because just like Pete, we don't just want to have some select group of people thinking they know it all. We want to have a genuine dialogue with the whole international community.
You were also saying that this book is available for educators to use free of charge. Can you talk a bit about that outreach?
Absolutely. I'm glad it's been a bestseller. It was a bestseller for 4 weeks here in the San Francisco Bay Area. Mm-hmm. And so I love bookstores and libraries, and I wanted to keep selling there. At the same time, we have donors, supporters who want the book out in the schools. And so they've bought large thousands of the book copies to put into the schools. So any teachers that are interested in teaching using this book, we will give them the book as long as they're going to use it in their schools to teach this forgotten history. America was leading the way with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Mm-hmm. So this is our heritage. This isn't something that we're making up. As long as they want to share that heritage, we want them to have the curriculum at their disposal.
The idea of the book being in bookstores, you must have done numerous appearances to speak about the book. What has the reaction been in the independent bookstores that you've gone out, not necessarily in the academic environment where you work, but out in communities and in the reading community? How have general readers reacted to the book and to the thoughts and ideas that have come from your personal appearances?
It's really been great. It's been a great atmosphere. And when I am out speaking in the bookstores, I have a PowerPoint. And so I've had these images of Eleanor Roosevelt and Rene Cassin, these others, Franklin Roosevelt, so that they can see. But I have images from around the world too, so that they get a sense that through this book that they're part of something big that's underway. And so there have been great discussions. I always I make a presentation, but I always save plenty of time for discussion, because the people love to talk about rights, as they should. I mean, these are basic core value issues. And students love to talk about them, the general public does, so it's always a fun time.
What are other materials? I think of a documentary film by a filmmaker I really appreciate called Taxi to the Dark Side, which followed a taxi driver who was unjustly sent to Guantanamo. What are other materials that have come along in the 10 years that it took to write this book that were important resources for you to consider?
Well, I think one of them, Pete, is the resources on global warming. It's just atrocious. Our generation, it's one thing for us to have done nothing, been driving these monstrous cars and having this whole coal-based system and just getting on with our lives for our kids when we didn't know better. Mm-hmm. But we do. It's foolish for people to be in denial. And for those of us who are looking at the true science, we have to do something. So that to me is one of the key things that's really a key piece of all of this is the environment. We need to have solutions that match the scope of our problems. With global warming, it's an international problem, okay? And with a lot of these the equality for women, these are international issues, right? These fundamental things need to be dealt with on the same scale with which the problems exist.
One more question about sort of a pop culture spin on this. I mentioned early in the interview that 2048 reminded me of the Kubrick 2001 or 2010 film and the Arthur C. Clarke titles. I'm a huge film geek, so I love science fiction movies, particularly those movies that came out in the early 70s, which had these very interesting ideas about the future. But the filmmaking...
Soylent Green, for
Soylent
example.
Green, the Omega Man,
Yeah.
Silent Running. I love the idea that we're all going to be wearing jumpsuits in the future, sort of polyester jumpsuits, and that for some reason they didn't realize that computers, 100 years in the future won't have a giant square blinking cursor, that the technology would advance faster than that. If you could look forward to the year 2048, what do you envision the world looking like?
I don't think that Charlton Heston realized what he was doing, but on the course that we're on right now, it's going to look like Soylent Green.
Yeah.
And we are just foolish to be going down this path. Listen, this is fun, and it's enjoyable to do 2048, but there are serious issues at stake now. In Soylent Green, for example, it's a great, I'm glad you brought this. You had the Reeks and the Wrecks. It's like a Vonnegut book too, if you like player piano. I would recommend to people here in this library, where you got the Reeks and the Wrecks and you got the elites, right? It's the same way in Soylent Green. Well, now in America, the top 400 people have more wealth than the bottom 150 million. Okay? And I'm no revolutionary. I don't want to take anybody's money, and I don't want any violence. But we need to take corrective steps to make sure that for our communities we have things like this. This is beautiful. This library is the epitome of where our international community needs to be. And this is socialism. This is the community getting together and saying we're going to pool our community resources to make sure that we have something good for our children, for our elderly, for our entire community. And I'm against state socialism. I love capitalism. I helped rewrite the Russian Constitution. Okay, I did more than a lot of CIA people in helping to bring down that whole thing. But at the same time, the University of California, again, socialism. It's not a matter of community support and being socialistic. It's a matter of it being a community service. I think that's the way to look at it. So right now, if you're looking in the future, I think we want to make sure that we don't end up in a Soylent Green kind of environment. And the way that we don't end up there is to make sure that we have a decent life for all people, while at the same time we have vast disparities in wealth for those who have earned it.
Well, I think the beautiful Walnut Creek Library is a great example of that. And so in conclusion, I just want to talk a bit about libraries. How have you used them in your entire life? And how do you use libraries now as far as an important resource for the research and the writing that you do?
Well, one thing is that I'll go to a library like this, or in Mill Valley, or in Berkeley, just because I like the atmosphere. One of the greatest things about this is that they've created this as a community resource. And it's just, to me, that's one of the great things, is the feeling, ever since in my youth, right, to be around books, to be among books, to have it be really positive sense of who I am and what I enjoy in life. I'll just go to them, just to be there. That's part of my answer. The other is that I remember there was a famous professor at Bolt, and I have these 3 law degrees there, so I spent a lot of time in the library. And he'd go up, and his name was Riesenfeld, and you would hear the shuffling, because by the time he was 80, he walked very slow, and he'd be shuffling. And I would be there on the 4th floor of the law school library with these books, and I would hear him come shuffling. And we'd be the only 2 up there. But that was an incredible experience, because we were both delving into the future for humanity as well as its past, right? We were figuring out where things were going. And that's why I think libraries are really a very powerful thing. It's because we're able to build on what we have by going to them and using them.
Well, that's a fascinating place to stop this conversation. J.Kirk Boyd, thank you so much for coming to the Walnut Creek Library to share your ideas and to tell us a little bit more about the 2048 project. You can learn more about the 2048 2048 project at the website 2048.berkeley.edu. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And thank you, the viewers, for tuning in to Get Lit. And make sure to tune in soon for more interviews with local authors. Thanks very much.